by R.M. Ballantyne. Chapter 2. The Fanatic and the Spy. The night was dark and threatening when Andrew Black and his shepherd left their cottage, and quickly but quietly made for the neighboring hill. The weather was well suited for deeds of secrecy, for gusts of wind, with an occasional spattering of rain, swept along the hill face, and driving clouds obscured the moon, which was then in its first quarter. At first the two men were obliged to walk with care, for the light was barely sufficient to enable them to distinguish the sheep track which they followed, and the few words they found it necessary to speak were uttered in subdued tones. Jean Black and her cousin, Aggie Wilson, had reported their rencontre with the two dragoons, and Quentin Dick had himself seen the main body of the troops from behind a heather bush on his way back to the farm. Therefore, caution was advisable. But as they climbed Scotch Hill, and the moon shed a few feeble rays on their path, they began to converse more freely. For a few minutes their intercourse related chiefly to sheep and the work of the farm. But both Andrew and his man were of the sedate, imperturbable nature which is not easily thrown off its balance by excitement or danger. Then their thoughts turned to the business in hand. "Nae fear o' the soldiers comin' here on a night like this," remarked Andrew, as a squall nearly swept the blue bonnet off his head. "Maybe no," growled Quentin Dick sternly, "but I've heard frae Tam Cantor that servants o' the Papist Earl and Nithsdale and the scoundrel Sir Robert Dalzell had been poking their noses about at Irongray. If they get wound o' this place, we're no likely to hae a quiet time out. Did you say that the soldiers ill-used the barns?" "Na, and all them was inclined to be impudent, but the ither, a good-looking young fella, according to Jean, took their part in quarrelling with his comrade. Say that they came to loggerheads at last, but what was the upshot nobody kens, for the bairns took to their heels and left them fetching." "And what if they sud fin your horse in the barns unprotected?" asked the shepherd. "They're no likely to find the horse in a nick like this, man, and if they do, they'll find nobody in Ramblin' Peter there, for I gied the lassies and the women strict orders to take to the hidey-hole at the first sound of horses' feet." By this time the men had reached a secluded hollow in the hill, so completely enclosed as to be screened from observation on all sides. They halted here a few moments, for two dark forms were seen in the uncertain light to be moving but just in front of them. "It's them," whispered Andrew. "What?" asked the shepherd. "Alexander McCubbin and Edward Gordon." "Guide and safe, men Beth," responded Quentin. "Ye better give them a cry." Andrew did so by imitating the cry of a plover. It was replied to at once. "The stane's a big, ye see," explained Andrew, while the two men were approaching. "It'll take the strength of the fewer o' us to lift some of them." "We've got the cairn aboot finished," said McCubbin, as he came up. He spoke in a low voice, for although there was no probability of any one being near, they were so accustomed to expect danger because of the innumerable enemies who swarmed about the country. The caution had almost become a second nature. Without further converse, the four men set to work in silence. They completed a circular heap or cairn of stones, 3 or 4 feet high, and leveled the top therefore to serve as a table or a pulpit at the approaching assembly. In front of this, and stretching towards a sloping brae, they arranged 4 rows of very large stones to serve as seats for the communicants, with a few larger stones between them, as if for the support of rude tables of plank. It took several hours to complete the work, When it was done, Andrew Black surveyed it with complacency, and gave it his opinion that it was a broad kirk capable of accommodating a congregation of some thousand more or less. Then the two men, Gordon and McCubbin, bidding him and the shepherd good night, went away into the darkness from which they had emerged. "Where will they be sleeping the night?" asked the shepherd as he and Andrew turned homeward. "Aye, the peat bog, I doubt, for I darena take them home when the dragoons is likely to gie us a cab. Besides, the hidey-hole will be o'er for soon. No, lad," he added, as they surmounted a hillock from which they had a dim view of the surrounding country, "gang ye doon and see if you can fin out anything more about the soldiers. I'll away home and see that all's right there." They parted, the shepherd turning sharp off to the right, while the farmer descended towards his cottage. He had not advanced above half the distance when an object a little to the left of his path induced him to stop. It resembled a round stone, and it was too small to have attracted the attention of any eye save one which was familiar with every bush and ground in the ground. Grasping a stout thorn stick which he carried, Andrew advanced towards the object in question with cat-like caution until quite close to it, when he discovered that it was the head of a man who was sleeping soundly under a whin-bush. A closer inspection showed that the man wore an iron headpiece, a soldier's coat, and huge jack-boots. "A dragoon and a spy," thought Andrew while he raised his cudgel, the only weapon he carried, and frowned. But Andrew was a merciful man. He could not bring himself to strike a sleeping man, even though waking him might entail a doubtful conflict, for he could see that the trooper's head grasped the hilt of his naked sword. For a few moments he surveyed the sleeper, as if calculating his chances, when he quietly dropped his plaid, took off his coat, and untying his neckcloth, laid it carefully on one side over a bush. Having made these preparations, he knelt beside Will Wallace, for it was he, and grasped him firmly by the throat with both hands. As might have been expected, the young trooper attempted to spring up and tried to use his weapon, but finding this to be impossible at such close quarters, he dropped it and grappled the farmer with all his might. But Andrew, holding on to him like a vice, placed his knee upon his chest and held him firmly down. "It's a no matter of use to strife, ye see," said Andrew, relaxing his grip a little. "I've gotten ye, and if ye like to do my bidding, I'll no be hard on ye." "If you will let me rise and stand before me in fair fight, I'll do your business, if not your bidding," returned Wallace in a tone of what may be termed stern sulkiness. "Div ye think it likely I'll stand before you in a fair fight, as you cad, you with the sword and me with the bit stick, my lad? Nah, you'll hae to submit a little, though ye like it." "Give me the stick, then, and take you the sword. I shall be content," said the indignant trooper, making another violent but unsuccessful effort to free himself. "It's a fair offer," said Andrew, when he had subdued the poor youth a second time, "and reflects favourably on your courage. But I'm a man of peace, and I have no thirst for bloodshed. Whilk is more than ye can say, young man, if you'll let me tie your hands together, and gang peaceably home with me. I's promise that nae mischief befall ye." "No man shall ever tie my hands together as long as there be life in my body," replied the youth. Stop, Collins," exclaimed Andrew as Will was about to renew the struggle. "The pride o' youth is awful. Hear what I've gotten to say to ye, man, or I'll have to throttle ye outright. It'll come to the same thing if you'll allow me to tie on your hands to one o' yours. Ye cannot object to that, surely, for I'll be your prisoner as much as you'll be mine, and that'll be fair play, for we'll leave the sword lying on the brae to keep the bit stick company." "Well, I agree to that," said Wallace in a tone that indicated surprise with a dash of amusement. "And ye promise not to try to get away when I'm tied to you?" "I promise." Hereupon the farmer, reaching out his hand, picked up the black silk neckcloth which he had laid aside, and with it firmly bound his own left wrist to the right wrist of his captive, talking in a grave, subdued tone as he did so. "Now do't the promise spy is hardly to be listened to, but if I find that you're a dishonorable man, I'll find that I'm an uncomfortable prisoner to be tied to. Now get up, lad, and we'll go on home together." On rising, the first thing the trooper did was to turn and take a steady look at the man who had captured him in his singular manner. "Well, what d'ye think of me?" asked Andrew with what may be termed a grave smile. "If you want to know my true opinion," returned Wallace, "I should say that I would not have thought, from the look of you, that you could have taken mean advantage of a sleeping foe." "Aye, and I would not have thought from the look o' you," retorted Andrew, "that ye could sell it to yourself to gang skulking about the hills as a spy upon the pure craters that are only seeking to worship their Maker in peace." Without further remark, Andrew Black, leaving his coat and plaid to keep company with the sword and stick, led his prisoner down the hill. Andrew's cottage occupied a slight hollow on the hillside, which concealed it from the very point of the compass save the high ground above it. Leading the trooper up to the door, he tapped gently, and was promptly admitted by some one whom Wallace could not discern, as the interior was dark. "Ah, Uncle Andrew, I'm glad you've come, for Peter has not come back yet, and I'm feared something has come o'er him." "Strike a light, lassie. I've gotten at a spy here, and canna will to do it myself." When a light was procured and held up, it revealed the pretty face of Jean Black, which underwent a wondrous change when she beheld the face of the prisoner. "Uncle Andrew!" she exclaimed, "this is not a spy. He's the man that came to help Aggie and me against the dragoon." "Is that so?" said Black, turning a look of surprise on his prisoner. It is true indeed that I had the good fortune to protect Jean and her friend from an insolent comrade," answered Wallace. "It is also true that that act has been partly the cause of my deserting to the hills, being starved by day and night, and taken prisoner now as a spy." "Sir," said Andrew, hastily untying the kerchief that bound them together, "I humbly ask your pardon. Moreover, it's my opinion that if ye hadna been starving, ye would not have been here eno, for you're uncommon tout. Run, lassie, and fetch some bread and cheese. Where is Marian and Isabel?" "They went out to seek for Peter," said Jean as she hastened to obey her uncle's mandate. At that moment a loud knocking was heard at the door, and the voice of Marion, one of the maid-servants, was heard outside. On the door being opened, she and her companion Isabel burst in with excited looks and the information pantingly given that the soldiers were coming. "Heard your noise, lassie, and lit the fire, pit on the parapet. Come, Peter, let's hear about it." Ramblin' Peter, who had been thus named because of his inveterate tendency to range over the neighboring hills, was a quiet, undersized, said to be weak-minded boy of 16 years, though he looked little more than 14. No excitement whatever ruffled his placid countenance as he gave his report, to the effect that a party of dragoons had been seen by him not half an hour before, searching evidently for his master's cottage. "They'll soon find it," said the farmer, turning quickly to his domestics. "Away with ye, lassies, and hide." The two servant girls, with Jean and her cousin Aggie Wilson, ran at once into an inner room and shut the door. Rambling Peter stood solidly down beside the fire and calmly stirred the porridge pot, which was nearly full of the substantial Scottish fare. "No, sir," said Black, turning to Will Wallace, who had stood quietly watching the various actors in the scene just described. Your comrades be here in a wee while. May I ask what ye expect? I expect to be imprisoned at the least, more probably shot. Pleasant expectations for a young man, nae doubt. I'm sorry that it's oot to my power to stop and see the fun, but the soldiers have a strange suspicion about me, so I'm forced to make myself scarce and leave Ramblin' Peter to do the hospitalities of the house. But before I go away, and wad fain repay ye for the guide turn ye dead to my barns, if you're willin' to shut your eyes and do what I tell ye. I'll put ye in a place of safety. Thank you, Mr. Black, returned Wallace. Of course, I shall only be too glad to escape from the consequences of my unfortunate position, but do not misunderstand me. Although neither a spy nor a Covenanter, I am a loyal subject and would not now be a deserter if that character had been forced upon me. First by the brutality of the soldiers with whom I was banded, and then by the insolence of my comrade-at-arms to your daughter. Niece, interrupted Black. I wish she was my daughter. Bless her bonny face. Never fear, sir. I have no doubt of your loyalty, though you and your friends misdoot mine. I claim to be as loyal as the best of ye, but there's no dictionary in this world that defines loyalty to be slavish submission of body and soul, to be a tyrant that fears neither God nor man. The question now is, do you want to escape, and will ye trust me? The sound of horses galloping in the distance tended to quicken the young trooper's decision. He submitted to be blindfolded by his captor. No, Peter, said Andrew as he was about to lead Wallace away. Ye ken what ye dae. Give them plenty to eat, show them the rum bottle, let them hae the run o' the house, and say that I bid ye treat them well. Aye, said Rambling Peter's laconic reply. Leading his captive out at the door, round the house, and re-entering by a back door, apparently with no either end in view than to bewilder him, Andrew went into a dark room, opened some sort of door, to enter which the trooper had to stoop low, and conducted him down a steep, narrow staircase. The horsemen, meanwhile, had found the cottage, and were heard at that moment tramping about in the front and thundering on the door for admittance. Wallace fancied that the door was closed behind him, must have been amazing thickness, for it shut out almost completely the sounds referred to. On reaching the front of the staircase and having the napkin removed from his eyes, he had found himself in a long, low, vaulted chamber. There was no one in it save his guide, and a venerable man who sat beside a deal table reading a document by the light of a tallow candle stuck in the mouth of a black bottle. The soldiers, meanwhile, having been admitted by Rambling Peter, proceeded to question that worthy as to Andrew Black and his household. Not being satisfied of the truth of his replies, they proceeded to apply torture in order to extract confession. It was the first time that this mode of obtaining information had been used in Black's cottage, and it failed entirely, for Ramblin' Peter was staunch, and although inhumanly thrashed and probed with sword points, the poor lad remained dumb, insomuch that the soldiers at length set him down as an idiot, for he did not even cry out in his agonies, except in a curious, half-stifled manner, because he knew well if his master were made aware by his cries of what was going on, he would be sure to hasten to the rescue at the risk of his own life. Having devoured the porridge, drunk the rum, and destroyed a considerable amount of the farmer's produce, the lawless troopers, who seemed to be hurried in their proceedings at this time, finally left the place. About that time that these events were taking place, in and around Black's cottage, bands of armed men with women and even children were hastening towards the same locality to attend the great conventicle, for which the preparations already described were being made. The immediate occasion of the meeting was the desire of the parishioners of the Reverend John Welsh, a great-grandson of John Knox, to make public avowal at the communion table of their fidelity to Christ and the attachment to the minister who had been expelled from the Church of Irongray, but strong sympathy induced many others to attend, not only from all parts of Galloway and Nithsdale, but from the distant Clyde, the shores of the Forth, and elsewhere, so that the roads were crowded with people, making for the rendezvous, some on foot, others on horseback. Many of the latter were gentlemen of means and position, who, as well as their retainers, were more or less well armed and mounted. The Reverend John Blackadder, the old minister of Tracador, a noted hero of the Covenant, who afterwards died a prisoner on the Bass Rock, travelled with his party all the way from Edinburgh, with a company of 80 horse proceeding to the meeting with Clydesdale. Preliminary services, conducted by Mr. Blackadder and Mr. Welsh, were held near Dumfries on the Saturday, but at the place of meeting in the Sabbath was only vaguely announced as a hillside in Irongray. So anxious were they to escape being disturbed by their enemies, and the secret was kept so well, that when the Sabbath arrived, a congregation of above 3,000 had assembled around the communion stones in the hollow of Scotch Hill. Sentinels were posted on all the surrounding heights. One of these sentinels was the farmer Andrew Black, with a cavalry sword belted to his waist, and a rusty musket on his shoulder. Beside him stood a tall, stalwart youth in shepherd's costume. "Your ain mother wouldna ken ye," remarked Andrew with a twinkle in his eyes. "I doubt that," replied the youth. "A mother's eyes are keen. I should not like to encounter even Gluttony in my present guise." As he spoke, the rich melody of the opening psalm burst from the great congregation and rolled in softened cadence towards the sentinels. It's the end of chapter 2 of Haunted and Harried. Join me next time for chapter 3. Thank you.